Hello, Internet, or again, at least the portion of the Internet that is geekily interested in how psychotherapy works or how it doesn't and how to get better at it. My name is Dr. Trevor Ahrendt. I'm coming back with another video from the Personalized Psychotherapy Institute. Again, if you're interested in receiving more of these videos, go ahead and I've been programmed almost to say smash the like and subscribe button by so many influencers, but that doesn't seem very therapeutic, so maybe we'll say cathect to the like and subscribe button. Oof, that's going to go down as one of the worst jokes in internet history. Regardless, so here we are. We're going to dive into another video. I've titled it something a little bit controversial to catch some attention. So what today I wanted to look at is how do therapists create emotional safety? And I want to propose you're probably doing it wrong, at least some of the time, because otherwise you would retain 100% of patients. And I know I don't retain 100% of my patients. I think I have a pretty good patient retention rate when I've collected data on it, but it's not 100%. And I don't think any therapist bats 1,000. So it's really important to think about, well, how are the ways that I'm not creating emotional safety effectively? I think most therapists would say that they aim to promote emotional safety in their practice. In fact, they might say it's a precursor to change or an absolute necessity for the therapeutic process. And they all say, yes, I'm good at promoting emotional safety. Similar to the other video that Dr. Schilbersatz produced where he said, okay, well, how do you tailor? Every therapist says they tailor their approach to meet the patients, but how? So similarly, how is it that you create emotional safety? What I think happens, and what the research seems to show, is that most therapists have a band of behavior that they stay in that they think promotes emotional safety. And if you ask them, usually it's something like warmth, responsiveness, which again, a little bit vague, but people would say warmth. They would say that they validate the patient's experience, probably. They might ask about or focus on emotions. And then there's some theoretical differences. So the folks in the behavioral world might say they tailor their approach and they create emotional safety by developing a good treatment plan that addresses the patient's needs and gives them skills and workbooks, workshops, etc., that address what their need is. And people in the psychodynamic or relational world would say that they're very adept at understanding the patient's inner world and evaluating and exploring relationship patterns as they evolve in the patient's life or in the therapy itself. And then again, other people in the somatic world would say, well, I'm able to track through mindfulness and somatic awareness about the way that emotions or trauma moves through the body, et cetera, et cetera. But what my point is similar to these videos, and you'll notice a theme if you've been following along, is that just taking a one-size-fits-all to patient care is bound to fail some of the time. It's impossible that it won't because people have different needs. So what I want to propose to you in this video is that if you want to be successful with a wide range of patients, one of the best things that you can do is learn to be flexible in your approach and learn to be flexible about understanding what constitutes emotional safety for different patients, because emotional safety needs are going to be different from patient to patient. So this video is going to be exploring that, and I'm going to give some examples of different patients that need something that might be what some people can consider counterintuitive in what would promote emotional safety. So one of the things that Control Mastery does that we really promote at the Personalized Psychotherapy Institute, and that's been shown at the research of the San Francisco Psychotherapy Research Group, is that while patients' needs are highly individualized, there are a set of simple principles that you can learn that will help you decode what a person needs to be safe. So it's not just an intuitive process, and it's not just something that some therapists are naturally good at, although it does seem that some therapists are naturally better at it than others. But there is a skill set that you can learn with these basic principles that you can deduce from clinical data and clinical experience how to make therapy increasingly safe for each individual patient in different ways. Okay, so before we get going, let's define a couple of terms. And if these are unfamiliar to you, I'd recommend you get the ebook, which gives the 5 best articles as a primer, or you can continue to watch our other videos that will spell these out, or we do trainings and things like that. So if you're interested in that. But I want to review some of the core concepts of control mastery theory. So first of all, what is safety? It seems like one of these simple ideas that should be easy to define, but it's actually pretty hard to operationalize when you get into it. So from a control mastery perspective, emotional safety is something very specific. It means that the conditions of the therapy are such that the patient feels confident that they can release their pathogenic or limiting beliefs and that nothing bad will happen or that they will be allowed to do that. So that's very specific. So that doesn't mean patient will feel validated. It doesn't mean that the therapist will be warm. It doesn't necessarily mean that the therapist will be non-directive or non-judgmental. Okay? It means that the patient's specific set of pathogenic beliefs, which are the beliefs that are blocking them from their goals in their life, that the therapy is set up in such a way and that the therapist intervenes in such a way that the patient has the experience and insight and awareness that they no longer need to live by those limiting beliefs because they don't make sense anymore, or it's okay to release them. And if that sounds a little vague, hang with me. We're going to get there. And especially, I think the examples will really clarify it. And so from the control mastery perspective, pathogenic beliefs come out of trauma, but trauma needs to be defined because that's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days. So from a control mastery perspective, in order to correctly identify traumas, you need to understand also not only the original experience, but also how it interacts with the patient's life now. Traumas are basically any experience. It could be a one-time experience, or more often it's a repeated experience. We call those strain traumas versus shock traumas. It's an experience or set of experiences that overwhelmed a person's ability to cope. That's one part. And then the second part is that it forced the patient to accommodate their belief system, to add beliefs or change beliefs that then explain the trauma. So for example, a patient who's physically abused, is overwhelming, terrifying. They needed to come up with some explanation to make sense of how the world works. So they came up with the belief, I'm bad and deserve it. Really common for children of abuse, right? I'm bad and deserve it. Therefore, this makes sense as is happening. And then they carry that belief going forward, I'm bad and deserve bad things, and come into the consulting room because they feel blocked from getting married to a partner that's actually pretty fantastic, but it's in conflict with this belief about reality of I'm bad and deserve bad things. So in order to correctly identify trauma, we need to understand how it's impeding the patient's life now and how it was overwhelming and what beliefs it created. And then once we do that, then we can understand how the patient is using therapy to test out, do I still need to believe this? Is it still necessary that I believe that I'm bad and deserve bad things? And if not, how does the therapy help communicate to me that that's not the case? Now, you can have 10 people with the same belief of I'm bad and deserve bad things, but they're going to show up in therapy differently. They're going to test using therapy differently. That's where the idiosyncratic nature of decoding this and clinical formulation comes in and is such an important skill. Okay? So when patients come into therapy, it's really important for us as therapists to understand that patients are going to be consciously and unconsciously evaluating us in the therapy of, is this safe? And safety, again, means, is this going to be safe in the way that I need it to be in order to surrender my limiting beliefs? And patients, just like we know from trauma, are going to be hypersensitive and hypervigilant to anything that signals safety or danger. Now, for those of you following, you might be saying, well, wait, like as soon as the patient walks into my office and they're evaluating for safety and danger, they don't really know anything about me yet. And I certainly haven't figured out what they need to be safe. That's right. That's the challenge that comes at you immediately in therapy and why the first couple sessions are often critical. And the research often shows that if people can get through the first, I forget how many, like 4 or 5 sessions, they're liable to stay for a while. But if they're going to drop out, it's probably in the first couple sessions. So learning how to formulate this, understand what a unique patient needs to feel safe, and being able to adjust your techniques and your attitude and approach to the person quickly is an absolutely critical skill to retaining patients and also improving outcome. So one last point before we get to the examples, though. When I say that patients are hypersensitive to these signals, that doesn't mean they're necessarily reading them correctly. Right? It means they're hypersensitive to how they're receiving these signals. So they can misinterpret us all the time. And in fact do, which is the nature of trauma, is that it sort of shapes your way of experiencing yourself in the world in ways that are biased towards survival, but not necessarily accuracy. So, this is where the challenge comes in, is trying to get up to speed as quick as possible. And I often think, and when I talk to other control mastery therapists about this, patients are beginning to test and evaluate, is this safe or not, before they even talk to you. When they look at your website or they read your bio, they're already evaluating, is this person going to help me is it safe to relinquish my pathogenic beliefs with them? So patients self-selecting for therapists actually can be a really positive thing in their treatment, I think, because it allows them the chance to begin evaluating sooner rather than later, improves the chances of having a good match. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So let's imagine a therapist, and to me, this is my kind of like archetype of the quote-unquote average therapist. This is somebody who has a basic Rogerian stance, right? So, Carl Rogers's contribution to the field were so profound. His ideas kind of disseminated across theoretical orientations, and this seemed to be a very good starting place for therapists to begin practicing from. So first of all, this would mean that therapists are warm. So they're relatively interpersonally warm, if they can manage that. That they're client-centered, which means that they keep most of the session focused on the client and asking questions about them and exploring their experience. It also means that on average, they probably tend to validate the client's experience more. So if the client says, well, I was sad, you not only validate the emotion of sadness, but that you also might move more quickly to validate that something did happen to make them sad and that feeling was justified. They're also not going to self-disclose very much, as therapists are going to keep that relatively one-sided. They're going to focus more on following the client or the patient rather than leading, okay? And then finally, they're going to be pretty non-judgmental and non-directive. And so I want to go through 5 examples real quick of times, just very briefly, with some sort of abstract clinical cases of when some of these principles actually would be counterproductive to creating safety, which might sound strange, like, well, when would being judgmental be useful as a therapist? So if you are curious, stay tuned. We're going to go into it. So the other thing I would add too is that especially therapists early on, I think, tend towards being soft-spoken. Rogers himself was relatively soft-spoken. A lot of times you see therapy demonstrations, the therapist is rather soft-spoken. They'll modulate their tone of voice. They'll move in a way that they believe communicates calm and ease, which to many patients it probably does. And there's under the idea that if my nervous system is regulated, I'm going to be speaking in a certain way, and therefore it's going to help you regulate by being able to do that. So let me give an example, though, of when I think that probably wouldn't increase safety with somebody. So imagine we have a patient come in, and they want to be more ambitious at work. They feel like they're stymied because they want a promotion, but they're having a hard time asking for it or promoting themselves. And they want the therapist's help. Now, let's imagine that they also had a parent or a caregiver who's incredibly depressed and very easily overwhelmed by the patient's energy and excitement or enthusiasm or even ambition. And you as the therapist come in and you speak very softly and you're very quiet and you're very soliciting and you just ask about a feeling and you move in this sort of tone. Now, I'm exaggerating it for the purpose of demonstrations, but for some therapists, it's not that far off. And for a lot of patients, that could be amazing. But for a patient who is hypersensitive to overwhelming another person and wants help with boldness, speaking in that sort of soft, slow cadence might make them anxious. It might make them feel less safe because they think, oh my God, this person's very calm and chill and soft, and I'm going to overwhelm them if I get too big in here. This doesn't feel good to me at all. This feels exactly like the type of problems I'm having. So if you had control mastery training and you were kind of sussing that out, you might go, ooh, even if my natural style is to be a little softer, I should probably pick up the energy with this person. And I should probably speak firmly, and I should be confident, and I should give them something that they can really push up against, because that will help them feel safe. Okay? So that's one example, right? So how could being soft-spoken be bad? Well, for some people, it could be a disaster. Now, how about non-directive, right? A lot of therapists really pride themselves in being non-directive. It's sort of a cornerstone of the therapy brand, in a sense, is that, hey, you can talk to somebody who's not going to tell you what to do. For the vast majority of time, with most people, it's probably really useful. Right? It's probably really useful not to be directive. It's useful to take a certain amount of humility. It's useful to be more exploratory, but not for every patient. So let's imagine a patient who comes in and they're in a bit of a crisis, or they've got some urgent things going on. Say they have a child who's abusing substances, or their partner's abusing substances, and it's really chaotic, and they're starting to get depressed, and they got a lot going on. Now, imagine this patient also had a parent who was very overwhelmed by life and pretty useless. They were pretty ineffective for whatever reason. Maybe the parent had substance abuse problems that kind of conquered them. Maybe the parent just wasn't particularly adept at navigating the challenges of the world. So for this patient, if they came in and said, what do I do? What do I do about this? taking a non-directive stance of, well, let's explore, could be a total disaster. That person could experience that as less safety inducing and really scary. It would be the equivalent, the metaphor that's been given to me when I've worked with patients like this, is it's like, look, doc, I'm coming in with a broken leg and you're asking me how I feel about it. Help my broken leg. Put a splint on it. Don't talk to me about how I feel. Help me solve the frickin' problem. And this patient could really be wanting that from a therapist because they have the pathogenic belief, I can't depend on others, I have to do everything myself. So for them, what they're testing in the therapy is, can I actually hope that other people are competent enough and that I'm worthy of them responding to me and that they can be useful? So that's where maybe it would be really helpful if you could know that to be, here's what I think you should do and why. Let's talk about it. What do you think of those ideas? But that would be my recommendation. That can be a godsend for some patients. Not only is it helpful in the moment, but it also helps them begin to surrender their pathogenic beliefs that they have to do everything alone. Okay? Another example, non-judgmentalness. This one's a great one, because non-judgmental and being directive, like how could that be a good thing? When would it be useful for a therapist to be judgmental? I have two experiences. Okay, so first of all, imagine that the patient is coming in, again, I used to work in substance abuse, so let's go with that because I've got a lot of experience with that and I've seen this frequently. Now, imagine that the patient is coming in and they had a really neglectful parent. They had a really, really neglectful parent who just let them do whatever they want. Reminds me of this one part of The Simpsons where Bart wanted to buy a toy and Marge said no. And then he saw this other boy who said to his parent, like, Mom, get me this toy. And she said, oh no. And then he said, you're such a jerk, Mom. I hate you. Get it to me or I'm going to punch you. And the mom said, oh, okay. And gave him the toy. And Bart goes, wow, that must be the happiest boy in the whole world. Right? It's a great laugh because intuitively I'll know that's terrible for children. The children feel terrible when they feel out of control and that nobody's setting limits for them and that nobody cares about them enough to set limits and protect them from their own impulses. So you might have a patient come in who feels out of control, who feels like they can't limit their own behavior. And consciously, they might tell you, I don't want that. But if you know enough about their unconscious life and that you know their background and their history, you might be tempted to conclude maybe they would feel safer if they felt that I was authoritative enough to hold a line with them or at least call out when they're doing something self-destructive. And there are a lot of cases in the control mastery research world that really show this, that for certain patients, some of the time, the therapist taking a strong stance with them and saying, no, I think what you're doing is dangerous. I care about you. This is a really bad decision. And you shouldn't drop out of therapy. In fact, I think you should come every week and we should talk about what's going on in your life because you're out of control and I'm really worried for you. That type of intervention can help some patients feel so contained and so understood and much safer. Now, of course, we can imagine therapists and patients where that's a disaster, right? Patients who are more concerned about autonomy, or the therapists have misread things, all that. So this is, again, I want to be so clear about this. This is not a one-size-fits-all. I'm just giving examples for the point to prove a point, okay? Another example might be a patient who always feels persecuted by the world. You might validate their feelings that they feel scared, but their unconscious goal might be, I want to feel safer with people. I want to understand that people are not always out to get me. And that to challenge their perceptions is really safety inducing. A lot of DBT falls under this category. DBT doesn't work with 100% of borderline patients because 100% of borderline patients don't have the same pathogenic beliefs, even though they have symptoms that somewhat look like the same, but they have different belief structures. But with some borderline patients, and many borderline patients, in fact, they might feel unduly persecuted by the world and having the strength to challenge them and say, I understand that you're sad. I'm not going to challenge that. I don't think what you're perceiving is accurate. Might feel profoundly helpful to somebody, even though it's technically kind of like invalidating their experience because you're challenging and saying your perception of the world is not correct. And that's why you don't feel good. And I'm going to help you with that. Okay. So let me just do one last example because I think I'm really gilding the lily at this point. People really stuck with me on these long-winded examples. So last one, let's imagine the neutrality stance, right? Like the therapist should be relatively neutral and shouldn't weigh in too hard. And this kind of builds off the last one. I've had many clients where one of the most helpful things that I have done is that I have just straight up told them when other people are behaving badly around them and that they don't have to be in relationships with people like that. For some people who, like the very first example of person abused, they think, well, I'm bad, I deserve bad things. They are so incapable of judging what is good and what is healthy in a relationship, and in fact are so used to negative experiences that there's no there when it comes to like imagining what a good experience. And I have to be really explicit with them and just tell them, this sounds like a really bad relationship to me. It sounds really abusive, or it sounds really painful. This is something I do extremely rarely, and I will often caveat it by saying, look, I'm not there, so I don't know, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. But this is what I'm hearing from you. And are you aware that you can have relationships that don't have to go that way? Do you know that that is actually a possibility for you? And so for some patients, again, I want to be really clear, I do that less of the time. These are all things that I personally do not as my natural stance with people. These are all places that I can get to with people if I have the formulation and the data in place to push me towards that. Because for most people, the sort of general therapeutic Rogerian stance does a lot of incredible good and doesn't need to be tinkered with that much. But for different people with different individual needs, the flexibility is absolutely paramount to addressing what they need in therapy. So I hope that's useful. I hope it's interesting to think about. I hope it leaves you maybe with a little bit more freedom also in your clinical practice, but I would also really encourage you, don't do these things because they sound intuitive or fun or interesting. Do it based on a formulation where you can really show to another therapist who knows this theory why you have built to this stance and why you're doing it. And they can go, yep, A to B to C, that absolutely makes sense. We're going to have a lot more videos on the future about control mastery itself, how to formulate, etc. And again, if you want to get going sooner, sign up for our mailing list and you'll get the free ebook, and you can subscribe to the channel and get more of these videos, and we'll let you know as soon as they come out. So I'll add one other thing too. If you're interested in specific types of videos, or you want our group to kind of talk about things from a control mastery, send us an email. Let us know what you're interested in. That's really helpful for us to know what people want. Okay? All right. Until next week, take care. Bye now.